Dr. Garrett Aldridge, the youngest chief of cardiac surgery in Mount Sinai Hospital's 112-year history, and a man whose name appeared on 2 research buildings, and one endowed chair he had asked them not to name after him, found his missing wife at 2:47 in the morning inside a coin-operated laundromat in a Nova Scotia fishing town he had never heard of. She was folding someone else's bedsheets, and when she looked up and saw him standing in the doorway with rain on his shoulders and car keys still in his hand, she said the one thing, out of every sentence in every language, that he had never once thought to prepare for. I thought I had more time. He had been driving since 9 in the evening. The cardiology conference in Halifax had run long and his flight back to Toronto had been grounded by weather. And after 2 hours in the terminal watching the departure board cycle through delays, he had rented a car because sitting still had stopped being something he knew how to do sometime around the 14th month. He drove west along the coast road because it was the only direction the highway pointed. He stopped twice for gas. The second time, in a town called Sable Creek, the attendant had told him the next station was 40 kilometers and suggested he fill the tank now. He had, and while the pump ran, he had looked across the road at the only lit window on the main street, a glass front building with a row of machines inside and a hand-painted sign above the door that read Ostrander's Wash and Fold, open all hours. The sign on the door said all hours. It was 2:47 in the morning. The machines were running, 3 of them churning the way machines churn when nobody is watching, steady and indifferent. And in the center of the room, at the long folding table under the fluorescent strip, a woman was shaking out a sheet the color of old cream, snapping it once to straighten the edge, and folding it in quarters with the flat efficiency of someone who had done this 10,000 times and had long since stopped thinking about it. He knew the shape of her hands before he knew anything else. He had been a husband for 3 years and a husband without a wife for 17 months, and the arithmetic of that had become a thing he carried in his chest, low and constant, like a pressure change before a storm. He pushed open the door. A bell above the frame rang once. She looked up. For 3 full seconds, neither of them moved. The machines turned. The rain tapped the glass behind him. Somewhere down the street, a truck passed on the coast road, and the vibration of it moved through the floor under his feet. I thought I had more time, she said. Her hair was different. Shorter, cut close around her jaw in a way he didn't recognize, a warm copper brown that caught the fluorescent light differently than the long, dark style she had worn before. She was wearing a grey fleece pullover and jeans that had been washed so many times the knees had softened to the color of fog. She was thinner, not alarmingly so, but the line of her collarbone was more present than he remembered, and her wrists, where the cuffs of the fleece were pushed back, were fine in a way that made something tighten behind his eyes. She set the sheet down on the table. She did not fold it any further. She stood very still and watched him cross the room. He had been a husband for the length of a reception that cost more than his parents' first house. And for 3 years after it, and for 17 months of a silence so total that his legal team had, at month 9, carefully begun using the word presumed in document he refused to sign. He had not signed them. He had also not slept without waking at least once a night, thinking he'd heard the front door. He had not eaten at the kitchen table. He had sat at his desk and worked and attended rounds and presented at conferences and smiled at the right moments in hospital corridors and gone home at night to an apartment that still had her reading glasses on the nightstand because he had asked the housekeeper to leave them. She had been missing since the morning of their 3rd wedding anniversary. Not dramatically, no scream, no shattered glass. He had woken at 6:15 to find her side of the bed already cool and a single sticky note on the kitchen counter that read, "I'm sorry, I will explain when I can. Don't look for me yet. Please, see." He had read it 4 times. He had set it down. He had called his lawyer and his brother and his mother, and none of those calls had made the morning make sense. Within the week, 2 city papers had run items. Within the month, the items had become columns with photographs. The wedding photo, her smiling at the Aldridge Foundation gala, the gap-toothed speculation about why a woman might leave a man like that. He had not commented. He had attended every board meeting and every surgery, and every public occasion that required a version of him that was upright and unhurt. He had hired 3 investigators. He had hired a forensic accountant. He had hired a woman named Petra McInnes, who specialized in finding people who had chosen not to be found. Petra McInnes, at month 12, had come to his office and sat across his desk and told him, without flinching, that Corinna had not left a trail because she had not wanted to leave one. and that Petra was not in the business of taking money for work that could not be done. He had paid her the agreed fee, and thanked her and walked her to the elevator and gone back to his desk, and stared at the same patient chart for 40 minutes without reading a word of it. Now, 17 months later, he stood in a laundromat in Sable Creek, while the rain came in off the Atlantic, and looked at his wife across a folding table scattered with other people's sheets. "You still have 2 machines running," he said, because it was the only thing he could manage to say. She glanced at the machines. 8 more minutes, Mrs. Ostrander's towels. He nodded. He pulled out the plastic chair beside the table and sat down. She looked at him for a moment as if she was deciding something. Then she went back to the sheet and folded it in half, and then in half again, and set it on the stack. "I was on my way back to Toronto," he said. "The conference in Halifax, my flight was grounded." "I know about the conference," she said quietly. "I saw it listed on the hospital website. I still check sometimes." He sat with that for a moment. The fact that she had been checking, the fact that she had known he was a day's drive from where she was sleeping and had not come to him. "Corinna." She set her hands flat on the table. "I'm not going to ask you to explain tonight," he said. "I just need to sit here for a minute." She nodded once. When the machine stopped, she transferred the towels to the folding table with the same quiet economy she had brought to everything else. She folded them and carried the stack to the shelf along the back wall. She set them in the labeled cubby. She came back to the table. She looked at him. "I have a room above the laundromat," she said. "It's small, there's a kettle. I'm off shift at 3. "I'll wait," he said. The room was small. A single bed, a braided rug the color of seagrass over a worn pine floor. A window seat with a cushion she had sewn from a remnant of checked wool. A bookshelf with 24 paperbacks and a stack of spiral-bound notebooks with the covers worn soft from handling. On the windowsill, a photograph of her grandmother, her mother's mother, the one who had died when Corinna was 16, and whom she had never stopped missing. No phone, no laptop, a single shelf in the kitchenette with flour and oats and a tin of loose tea. There was no picture of him. He did not look for one, and when he noticed himself not looking, he stopped and looked anyway. It was not there. She made tea. She sat on the edge of the bed with her knees folded under her and her mug in both hands. He sat in the chair by the window. "Ask me what you need to ask," she said. "Why did you leave?" She closed her eyes. She breathed in slowly and out slowly. "That is the thing I cannot tell you all of yet. I will tell you. Not tonight." "Then tell me what you can." So she did. She told him she had been in Sable Creek for 11 months. Before that, she had worked for 4 months as a kitchen hand in a cafeteria in Moncton, New Brunswick, and for 2 months as a stock clerk at a building supply yard in Truro. Before that, she had spent 6 weeks at a women's resource center in a city she did not name. She had lived since the morning she left under the name Dal Dal, her mother's maiden name, the one on her mother's original birth certificate before the marriage. She had not accessed their joint account. She had opened a credit union account, here under that name, with $40 she had earned the first week. There was, she said, looking at the mug, $817 in it now. That was everything she owned. She had not been with anyone else. She had not been in danger. She had not, and she said this looking directly at him, her voice level. She had not wanted to leave him. "I left because of something I found," she said, "and I could not tell you what it was, and I could not stay while I tried to fix it, and I needed to fix it myself. I am almost done. I need 14 more weeks." He pressed his knuckles against his mouth. He breathed through his nose. 14 weeks. 14 weeks. And at the end of 14 weeks, she looked at her tea. "At the end of 14 weeks, I will either be able to come home with you, or I will be able to tell you everything and let you decide whether you still want me to." He stood up. He walked to the window. The rain had softened to a mist. The street below was empty. Across the road, the laundromat window still glowed, the machines dark now, the folding table bare. "I'm not going to ask you to come back," he said to the glass. "I'm not going to call anyone. I'm going to find a room at the motel down the road, and I'm going to be in this town. I'll eat at whatever restaurant exists here. I'll be somewhere you can find me when you're ready. And in 14 weeks, when you've done what you're doing, you can decide whatever you decide. And I'll be wherever you can reach me." She did not speak for a long moment. "Garrett, I'm going to do it, Corinna. You have a department. I have a deputy chief who has been waiting for me to take a leave for 2 years. You have your mother. My mother has my brother and 3 grandchildren and enough opinions to sustain a small city. She will be fine. Garrett. Her voice was different now. Quita, you don't have to. I know I don't. She closed her eyes. When she opened them, there was something in her face he had never seen there before. Something made of relief and sorrow in equal measure, sitting together the way two difficult things sometimes have to sit. Don't tell anyone your real name, she said. Not the motel, not the diner, not anyone. All right. Don't order the lobster chowder at the Anchor until you've been there a week. Bev doesn't like strangers acting like they know the menu. The corner of his mouth moved almost. All right. Don't tip more than 15%. People notice. All right. He walked to the door. He had his hand on the frame. He stopped and turned back. Corinna. Yes. I kept your office the way you left it, he said. I told the building manager you were on sabbatical. Your plants are still alive. Mrs. Pellerin across the hall waters them on Thursdays. She pressed her lips together. She shook her head once, slowly, the way someone does when they need a moment before they can speak again. Don't tell me things like that yet, she whispered. Please. Not yet. I won't be able to do what I need to do. I'm sorry, he said. All right. He went down the stairs and walked through the rain to the motel 4 blocks away. He paid cash for a week, gave the name Gordon Lewis, and said he was a researcher on a deadline. The man at the desk, a wide, unhurried man who introduced himself as Reg, did not ask further questions. He took the key to a room with one window facing the main street and sat on the edge of the narrow bed without removing his coat for a long time. Then he lay down and slept. In the morning, he bought 2 pairs of jeans and 3 flannel shirts and a canvas rain jacket at the general store on the corner. He bought rubber boots. He was a cardiac surgeon who had not owned rubber boots since childhood, and the young woman at the register looked at his original shoes with an expression of sympathetic bafflement and suggested he also buy wool socks. He bought the socks. He went to the diner. It was called the Anchor, which he had assumed was a cliché and turned out to be a family name. The Anchors had run it since 1962. The woman behind the counter was Bev Ostrander, 60-something, hair braided and pinned, apron with a crest on the pocket. She brought him coffee without asking and said, "Menus on the board." He looked at the chalkboard on the wall and ordered eggs and did not order the chowder. Corinna came in for her shift at noon. She wore a different grey pullover and her hair pulled back with a twist of elastic. She tied on an apron. She picked up an order pad. She went to the table of 2 older men in fisherman's overalls and she smiled at them and wrote down what they said. He watched her work for the next 2 hours. She moved through the Anchor, the way she had once moved through the hospital charity gallus. She had organized in their first years of marriage, with quiet authority, knowing which table needed what, carrying 3 things at once without appearing to hurry. The older man at the counter, who was over several days, revealed to be Stan Colpitts, retired from lobster boats, presently managing a bad knee, lit up when Corinna set his bowl down. The young woman with a baby by the window got a cloth for the spill before she asked for one. Bev caught Corinna's eye from the kitchen pass-through with a look that meant the table by the door needed water, and Corinna was already moving toward the pitcher. She did not look at him once. He did not look away. On the 3rd day, Bev came to his booth. She stood with her arms folded and her head tilted and looked at him the way a person looks at something they have already figured out. "You found her," she said. He looked up from the local paper. "I figured it'd happen eventually," Bev said. "I've been watching you watch her for 3 days, and I've been watching her pretend she doesn't know you're watching, and I've worked this counter for 31 years, and I know what that looks like." He set the paper down. "I'm not going to take her anywhere." "I know you're not. She's not the kind of woman who gets taken anywhere." Bev refilled his coffee. "She walked in here 15 months ago with 2 bags and a pair of shoes 1 size too big and asked if I needed help. I told her to come back at 6 the next morning in shoes she could stand in all day. She was here at 5:45. She paused. "She's the best worker I've had since my daughter moved to Calgary, and she has never once in 15 months asked me for a single thing she hadn't already earned." He looked at the table. The coffee surface trembled slightly. After a moment he realized his hand was trembling. "I'm going to wait," he said, "until she's ready." "Good," said Bev. She straightened. "She talks about you, you know, not by name, but she talks about you, not the way a woman talks about someone she's running from. More the way someone talks about a place they wish they could go back to." She picked up the coffee pot. I figured that was worth saying. He could not answer. He looked back at the window. The truth became tellable on the 19th day. Not through what she chose to say, but through what he found. He had been turning over the one sentence she had given him. I found something, and I could not tell you, and I needed to fix it myself, for 2 weeks. On the evening of the 17th day, lying in the motel room listening to rain on the window, he had finally turned the sentence far enough to notice what it implied. She had said fix it. She had said it had to be fixed from the outside under a different name without any connection to him. She had said she needed 14 weeks, and then he would understand. He had never asked himself what kind of problem required 17 months, a false name and no electronic trail to fix. On the 18th morning, he drove to the nearest town with a payphone. He called his hospital's legal counsel, a woman named Linda Fairweather, who had been with the board for 11 years, and who knew his family trust structure the way an architect knows a building she helped design. He asked her, carefully, without explaining why, to pull a complete registry of every numbered company and foundation entity registered with his signature or his foundation's notary stamp in the past 4 years. He told her to do it quietly. He told her not to involve the outside firms. He told her to call him at the motel number when she had some. Linda Fairweather called on the morning of the 19th day. The registry was 61 pages. He sat at the small desk in the motel room and read it in an hour. Most of it was expected: the foundation entities, the research endowments, the family trust shells from his grandfather's estate. There were 2 he did not recognize. They were nested. The outer company was registered in a province he had never incorporated in. The inner one held the outer one's assets. 3 small commercial cleaning companies, 2 in Ontario, 1 in Alberta, that operated on a cash model and had, over the past 3 years, been moving money through bank accounts in a pattern that looked, even to his untrained eye, like money that wanted to look clean and was not. The signatures on the outer registration were his. He recognized them, the rounded G, the particular hook on the D in Aldridge. He also recognized the date. It was the date of the Aldridge Foundation's annual gala, the gala at which he had, at the end of the evening, signed a stack of documents that his brother Troy had brought in a leather portfolio and described as the routine year-end foundation renewals. He closed the registry. He sat at the desk for a long time. Then he walked to the Anchor. It was mid-afternoon. The diner was quiet. Bev was in the back. Stan was at the counter. Corinna was polishing salt and pepper sets at the far booth. He walked to her table and sat down across from her and set the folded printout on the formica between them. She looked at it. She set down the salt shaker. She looked up at him. "You found it," she said, not a question. "Tell me," he said. She told him. She told him about the gala. She told him about staying late that evening to finish the table arrangements while he went ahead to greet the donors. She told him about finding Troy's jacket left over the back of a chair. Troy's jacket, with its inside pocket open and a folded sheaf of papers visible, and how she had pulled them out to fold them safely, and had stood alone in the emptying ballroom and read them. She had understood enough. She had been a corporate paralegal before they were married. She had understood the structure. She had understood whose name was on the outer registration, and whose was on the inner one, and what the 3 cleaning companies would look like to a financial crimes investigator who received an anonymous tip. Troy had come back for the jacket 10 minutes later. He had seen her face. He had sat down across from her in the empty ballroom and smiled, and had told her very calmly that the registrations had been in process for 3 years, and that Garrett's signature on them, authentic, because Garrett had signed what he believed were routine foundation renewals, was on every page. He told her that her own name was listed as a corporate director on the inner company, registered from a consent form she had signed at the prior year's gala, which she had believed to be a donor acknowledgement. He told her that if she said a word to Garrett, or to anyone, he would ensure the registration documents were noticed by the kind of investigator who looks for patterns in small cleaning companies, and that when they were noticed, the trail would lead to Garrett and not to him, because Troy Aldridge, on paper, had no involvement at all. He had left with the jacket over his arm and walked out to the terrace where Garrett was laughing with the foundation board chairs. She had watched them from the ballroom doorway. She had driven home alone. She had sat at the kitchen table until 5 in the morning. She had gone upstairs and kissed gift for Ed White while he slept and come back down and packed one bag and written the note and left. "I thought about waking you," she said. Her hands were flat on the table, steady in the way hands are steady when their owner has been steadying them for a long time. "I thought about calling the police. Every version I could see ended the same way. He had 3 years of preparation. You had nothing that would look different from guilt. Garrett had not moved. He watched her hands. "The only way to unwind the two companies cleanly," she continued, "without your name appearing anywhere in the dissolution, was for me to file the unwinding myself, under my mother's maiden name, as the wrongly registered corporate director. The forms I had signed were signed as Corinna Dahl, not as Garrett Aldridge. That was the door he left open without knowing it." She touched the edge of the printout briefly and withdrew her hand. "I needed to be a woman with no last name and no permanent address and no public connection to you. The moment I was identifiably your wife, any filing I made would be challenged as a spousal action on your behalf, and the whole structure would be flagged as a potential cover-up rather than a fraud correction." She paused. She picked up the salt shaker, not to polish it, just to hold something. "The first dissolution took 9 months to prepare. I filed it from Moncton. The second took 6 months. I filed it 3 months ago from Halifax. There is a third. The third requires an in-person hearing in front of a provincial registrar. The hearing is in 14 weeks. I have to appear as Corinna Dahl with affidavits I have been writing since month 4, and I have to do it without a lawyer and without a connection to you. After the hearing, the third company dissolves. Troy's structure collapses. The assets revert to the foundation. The CRA gets the paperwork. The rest is their jurisdiction, not ours." She set the salt shaker down. 14 more weeks, she said, "and it will be over, and you will be untouched, and Troy will either answer for it or he won't, but it won't be your name answering." He pressed the heels of his hands against his eyes. He breathed once, slowly. "You have been doing this for 17 months, he said. "Alone?" "Yes. Without a lawyer. With a public library, a provincial corporate code handbook, and 2 correspondence courses in administrative law I completed by mail." He took his hands away from his eyes and looked at her for a long time without speaking. "Why didn't you trust me to handle it?" he said finally. She was quiet for a moment, not evasive, thinking. "Because you would have handled it, Garrett," she said. "You would have walked straight at Troy. You would have hired 6 lawyers and a forensics team, and you would have made it about your name and your foundation and your family. And the moment you did that, the moment this became a known legal action by Garrett Aldridge against his own brother, every filing I'd made would be re-examined, and Troy would claim I'd been acting as your agent all along. The whole thing would collapse." She looked at him directly. "The only reason it works is that she is a woman nobody has heard of, filing a clerical correction on a corporate directorship she never consented to hold. The moment she becomes your wife, she stops being able to do that." The silence in the diner was complete. Bev behind the counter had stopped moving. Stan turned one page of his newspaper very slowly. He understood. He understood it with the kind of clarity that arrives in a body like a physical thing, something that displaces the air in the chest. She had been right. She had been right on the morning of the sticky note. She had been right in every motel room and every library carol and every shift in this diner and every document she had typed alone in a room with no phone. She had been the only person who could do it, and she had known that, and she had done it. "I want to say one thing," he said, "and then I want to ask you a question." She waited. "You are the bravest person I have ever sat across from in my life," he said, "and I have spent 17 months building stories about why you left me, and not one of those stories ever let you be who you actually are. I'm sorry for that. I'm sorry that whatever I built around us, around my name and my career and my family, made it more useful for you to disappear than to come to me. I should have been someone you could come to." She was crying now, not loudly. Tears on her face, shoulders still, hands flat, she let them fall. "There is nothing to apologize for," she said. "There is." She shook her head once. "There is only 14 weeks. He looked at her. "What can I do in 14 weeks that won't put any of it at risk?" She wiped her face with her sleeve. She thought. "You can stay in Sable Creek," she said. "You can be whoever you've told Reg you are. You can eat at this diner. You can let me finish what I'm finishing. You cannot call any lawyers. You cannot pull any more registries. You cannot, under any circumstances, approach Troy. You can be in this town when I come back from the hearing. That's all." "All right," he said. "Garrett." "Yes. Thank you for not making me explain it all tonight." He could not answer that. He nodded once. He stayed for 5 weeks. He learned Sable Creek the way you learn a town when you have nowhere else to be. He learned that Stan Colpitts walked out to the old lighthouse at the point every morning out of a habit formed over 40 years of working boats. He learned that Bev rang a small brass bell on the counter when the daily special was ready, and that the sound of it was somehow different from every other bell. He learned that Corinna had been teaching the teenage daughter of the motel family to read music on Tuesday evenings in the back room of the laundromat on a keyboard with 2 broken keys, because the girl wanted to learn, and the nearest music teacher was 60 kilometers away. He helped Stan repair a section of dock. He had never repaired a dock in his life, and Stan, who had repaired docks for 50 years, did not mock him for it. They worked side by side for an afternoon in the salt air, and Stan told him without being asked that Corinna had a good head on her and a kind way of making a person feel like they'd done something right. "She brought me soup in February when my knee was bad," Stan said, handing him a nail. "Didn't make a fuss of it, just left it on the step." On the evening of the 5th week, Linda Fairweather called the motel from her personal number. She told him carefully that a financial journalist in Toronto had contacted the hospital's communications office asking about the Aldridge Foundation's year-end filing history. She told him the question had been too specific to be routine. She believed someone, possibly Troy, possibly someone acting for him, was beginning to apply pressure from the public side. If a journalist ran something connecting the foundation to the shell companies before Corinna's hearing, the hearing could be delayed on procedural grounds. He told Corinna that evening on the dock at the end of the main street. She listened without interrupting. She was very still. "He knows the second dissolution was filed," she said when he finished. "He's trying to raise the temperature before the third one goes through." "Then I'll go back," Garrett said. She looked at him. "I'll go back to Toronto. I'll appear at the hospital. I'll give a brief statement to a journalist I trust. Conference travel, personal leave, the family is well. I'll be photographed at a board meeting. I will be the dullest, most visible cardiac surgeon in the country for the next 9 weeks. I'll give him no story because there's nothing attached to me that looks like a story. And then, the morning after your hearing, I'll come back here." She looked out at the water for a long moment. The harbour was black and calm. A single light at the end of the dock reflected in the surface, broken and steady at once. "You would do that," she said finally. "After all of this, you would walk back into that city knowing I'm here." "Yes." She turned and looked at him. "All right," she said quietly. "Go." He left the next morning. He drove back to Halifax and flew to Toronto and walked into Mount Sinai at 10 o'clock and was photographed in the lobby by 3 people with phones who had not expected to see him. He gave a 20-minute interview to a medical journalist he had known for 8 years and said he had been traveling, he was well, the department was in excellent hands. He attended a board meeting. He went to the symphony with his mother, which was the only social occasion his mother would accept, as evidence that he was truly all right, and he was photographed at the symphony with his mother, and the journalist in Toronto wrote something brief and benign about the Aldridges, and moved on. Troy's pressure did not escalate. The hearing was not challenged. On the morning of the hearing, Corinna Dahl drove 4 hours to a provincial government building in a wool blazer she had found at a thrift shop and a folder of affidavits she had typed herself on the used typewriter she kept under the laundromat counter. She signed in under her mother's name. She waited on a bench in the hallway. For an hour she was called in. She gave testimony for 9 minutes. The registrar read the affidavits. The registrar asked 2 questions. She answered them clearly and without hesitation. The registrar granted the dissolution. She walked out into the afternoon light. She drove 4 hours back to Sable Creek. She climbed the stairs to the room above the laundromat and slept for 10 hours, the first unbroken sleep in 17 months. The next day, Garrett drove back to Sable Creek. He took the same coast road. He stopped at the same gas station. He crossed the same main street with its one blinking yellow caution light. He pulled into the parking lot of the Anchor. He pushed open the door. The bell above the frame rang once. Bev looked up from behind the counter and smiled, the smile of a person who had been expecting this for a long time. "Sit anywhere, Hon," she said. He took his usual booth. Stan raised his mug from the counter. Bev brought coffee without being asked. The diner smelled of salt air and frying butter and old wood floors and something that had started, over the weeks he had spent here, to feel like a place that had been keeping something safe for him. Corinna came out of the kitchen. She was wearing the grey pullover. Her hair was tied back. There was a faint streak of flour on her sleeve she had not noticed. She looked across the room at him and did not smile immediately. She looked at him the way a person looks at something they had not been entirely certain they would see again, something they had tried not to hope for too specifically. Then she walked over. She sat down across from him. "It's done," she said. "It's done," he said. She reached across the table. She set her hand over his on the formica. "Will you come home?" he said. "Yes," she said. "Give me a week to give Bev proper notice. A week to say goodbye to Stan and to finish the music lessons and help Bev find someone for the laundromat. A week to pack, which will not take long because there is very little to pack. And then yes, I'll come home with you." He closed his hand around hers. Bev, behind the counter, looked at the ceiling for a moment with her arms folded and her mouth pressed shut in the particular way of someone choosing not to make a fuss. Stan turned a page of his newspaper. The diner exhaled. A year later, Garrett and Corinna lived in Sable Creek through the summer months and in Toronto for the rest of the year. They bought a small white house at the end of the harbour road, 2 blocks from the anchor, with a side door that opened directly onto the dock path, so you could be at the water in 3 minutes. The house had a guest room that Bev used when her back was bad, and the stairs to her apartment were too much. It had a back porch, where Stan sat on Sunday afternoons and complained about the harbour authority, with the contentment of a man who had nothing serious left to complain about. Troy Aldridge eventually became the subject of a CRA investigation, and then a provincial securities inquiry. The process was slow and unglamorous, the way such processes are, and it did not touch Garrett Aldridge's name. The foundation's assets were quietly restored. The cleaning companies were sold. The proceeds went to the province, and then a portion went, through channels Corinna had quietly suggested in her affidavits, to 2 women's resource centres, one in the city, where she had spent 6 weeks in a room with a donated blanket and a stack of legal code books from the library branch around the corner, and one in Moncton, where a cafeteria manager had once walked her to the bus in the rain and not docked her pay. Garrett had not known about the resource centres until the thank you letters arrived at the Toronto address. He read both letters and set them on the kitchen table and looked at them for a long time without speaking. "You planned that from the beginning," he said. "From month 3, she said. "When I understood how the dissolutions would work, I understood where the assets would eventually go. I wrote it into the affidavits as a suggested allocation." She picked up one of the letters. The registrar was not obligated to follow the suggestion. She paused. She did, though. He looked at her. She was standing at the kitchen window of the Toronto apartment, the one she had not seen in 17 months, the one whose plants had survived on their neighbour's Thursday visits, with the morning light on her face and her coffee in her hand, and a stillness about her that was different from the stillness she had carried when he found her in that laundromat doorway. Not the stillness of someone carrying something alone, the stillness of someone who has put something down and chosen, finally, where to stand. She was more herself than he had ever seen her. He thought that, watching her. He thought he had not known her well enough before to know that there had been a version of her still becoming, and that it had taken 17 months in motel rooms and library carols and diner shifts and a 4-hour drive alone to a government building, and that she had come back from all of it, not diminished but arrived. "Corinna," he said. "Yes." "I'm glad you came back." She turned from the window and looked at him with the same expression she had given him across the table in the anchor. That particular look composed of disbelief and relief in equal measure. "I thought I had more time," she said and smiled. "When you walked through that laundromat door." "I know." "I was wrong," she said, "as it turns out." She crossed the kitchen and put her arms around his waist and set her cheek against his shoulder, and stood there in the morning light, in the quiet apartment, in the city they were learning to come home to again. 14 weeks would have been enough, but so was this.